screen. This one.
Perfect. It says recording in progress now.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, it takes a village these days, doesn't it, to run the technology? Whew. Oh, okay. So does that look pretty good for everyone? We'll start. I know you're all really busy, and I so appreciate you making time for this because it's a topic near and dear to my heart. I know for all rehab therapists, we get it. And sometimes our life is more about the mission of helping other people understand that, well, they'll be fine. Once the pain goes away, they'll be able to sleep again. And we know that that is not always the case. So if it's okay with everyone, I'll get started. You saw my bio. I wanted to thank Stuart and Alex and everyone else who was involved in making this happen. I really appreciate that. And I'm a professor at the Department of Occupational Therapy at the University of Alberta. So I have been lucky enough to meet a few of you maybe in passing and your colleagues, and really appreciated those opportunities. So what I thought I would do this morning is give you a bit of basic sleep biology, because when you understand that, then you can see, oh, that's why the recommendation is such and such, right? You put the pieces together. And also you'll be able to help your clients and your patients problem solve better when you understand some of the biology, like, oh, why that is a problem for sleep. And it'll be very high level because we don't have time to go into all the minutia, but you'll be able to, I'll send you some resources that you can look at as well if you want to go more into this. And the point that I really want to help bring across today, and that is clearly demonstrated the evidence, and no one should argue with you about this anymore, is that sleep and pain are bidirectional. We have very clear evidence that when people are sleep deprived, their pain thresholds are lower. They have more functional challenges. And that's a reversal of the old thinking that I was alluding to before, where people would just say, oh, well, of course they've got pain and they're not sleeping. So we'll just deal with the pain and then the sleep will go away. But what we're actually seeing now is that chronic sleep deficiency increases the likelihood, and I'll give you some of the literature about this in a minute, increases your likelihood of having some kind of a pain episode. And also, well, it increases your risk. I'll wait till I show you the slides before I babble on about this. Sorry, I'm getting out of order here. And then I'm going to talk some very pragmatic things that any of us can do to help our clients understand how they could change their environment to promote sleep. Because takes a long time to develop sleep deficiency, and sometimes little things matter. And when people have chronic pain or have a pain, something else going on, they don't have the energy for doing a lot of other things. So we want to start with small, pragmatic, the low-hanging fruit, right? Because those small changes can make a big difference. Okay, so pain and sleep deficiency, really, they are like twins. They share a lot of neurological pathways. The things, well, if I asked you to guess here, like which belongs to which, I hope you would all say, oh, isn't that interesting? These things look the same. When people have pain, they have problems with healing, digestion, hormonal regulation, everything is affected, right? And it's the same thing with sleep. We have very clear evidence that when you are sleep deficient, your healing is delayed. So those people who are in pain in hospital or have undertreated pain, digestion is affected, all kinds of hormonal regulation. I'm going to show you some more specific slides about that in a minute. The central nervous system is affected, your emotional regulation, absolutely. I'm sorry, I'm just trying to slide my viewing box around a bit because I can't read my slide at the same time. Your sensory processing effect, and then emotional regulation, right, is very much affected both in pain and when you have sleep deficiency. So that overall feeling of well-being, the ability to concentrate, mood, emotions. And what's interesting about sleep deficiency is that, well, think about when you go on vacation. You remember vacations, right? You'd go away and you'd be very, very tired, but usually felt pretty euphoric. And initially, sleep deficiency presents with euphoria, but then over a period of time, you start to have paranoia and depression, a lot of negative feelings. And so we know those are not good situations when a person has pain. It interferes with their ability to problem solve and to manage. So anyway, there's a lot of overlap, right? So here's what I want to show you specifically related to sleep and hormonal regulation. We know a lot of, pain and sleep are both highly regulated within the HTPA, all right? So your hypothalamic adrenal axis. I missed something in there. Hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, sorry. It's early in the morning. And what we know is that there are many hormones that are regulated during sleep, and also that regulation is also important for having good sleep. So things like growth hormone, if you're sleep deficient, growth hormone is interfered with. We know that's important for healing. Antidiuretic hormones are prevented. Now that's interesting, right? Because not maybe so much for pain, but it has to do with if your body is not producing the hormones and the neurochemicals required to turn on and off your need to get up and urinate, just going right to that right now, you're not going to sleep as well, right? People are going to continue to wake up and get in and out of bed and stuff. So it's kind of paradoxical that if you're sleep deprived, you're more likely to wake up and feel that you need to urinate. Whereas if you're properly hydrated, so people who dehydrate themselves before sleep, they're not really doing themselves a lot of favors. Melatonin, we all know about. People need to produce melatonin. We produce that naturally for ourselves. And it's not just about sleep, right? It's also an anti-inflammatory. So we need melatonin. And we'll talk more about why that's not something we should be trying to use, just automatically going to it as a supplement, as opposed to helping our bodies produce it for ourselves. Oxytocin is related to this, right? It's something that's metabolized and produced during sleep cycles. So we need it. The peak is usually about 5 hours after sleep has started. So if you're one of those people who believes that you can get by on 4.5 hours of sleep, it's a bit of a problem for you, right? You're potentially not going to reach your full potential in these areas. And prolactin, that's another important hormone. Again, it's involved with sleep. Okay, so these are hormones that are released in the body that, again, there's more of them. Appetite, it's interesting, this whole thing about appetite regulation is very much influenced by how we sleep. There's two hormones, ghrelin and leptin. And those two, one turns on your appetite and one turns off your appetite. And if they're not properly regulated, what we've seen is that people, that the one to suppress appetite isn't produced. And so what happens then is people feel hungry all the time. So when you're sleep deprived, people feel hungry all the time. Their insulin regulation is out of whack. And they've done studies with healthy 18-year-olds where just through sleep deprivation, only allowing them to sleep for about 4 hours a night, they've actually moved them into a pre-diabetic states. So, and those, actually there was one study they had to stop because the findings were so concerning. So you can see, these things over time, the toll that they take. I mean, we're all fairly resilient. We can take the sleep deficiency that comes with vacation or some kind of a traumatic experience or, a death or something like that. But those are acute episodes. But if it's chronic, if it moves into a chronic state, then you can see why these things are so problematic. I already talked about cortisol, aldosterone. So, again, regulating sodium, potassium in the body, very important. Leptin, I already mentioned that, right? Regulates your body weight by inhibiting hunger. So if you're not producing leptin, you're in trouble. Excuse me. And then just for those of you who would like a more nuanced and in-depth discussion of this, this is a great presentation by Russell Foster. Russell Foster is a widely respected neurophysiologist who he's just done some amazing stuff with sleep. But this is a screenshot from one of the presentations he did quite recently, and you can get it on YouTube, but it's fairly long, so I didn't take any chunks out of it. But as you can see, about 9 minutes in, he talks about what peaks at certain times. So melatonin, we see peaks at a certain period of time. But then things like our temperature, it drops over time. Our ability, our acuity, right? So multiplication accuracy, it drops over the course of the night, then it peaks in the morning. But these are all things that are involved with cortisol, testosterone. They're all involved with sleep. So I'm not, you know, I feel it some days like I'm beating a horse that doesn't need any beating, but I think we all understand it's very important. Sleep matters. It's not just sort of an extra that you add on later. Margaret Thatcher was, for those of you who remember, she was kind of famous for saying, I'll sleep when I'm dead. Get on with it. You know, we don't need to sleep. We'll do it later. And Nike sort of had a campaign like that too. You know, sleep was for sucks. Anyway, so pain and sleep are locked together. And yes, pain can cause sleep deficiency, but sleep deficiency increases your risk for pain. So you can see how this cycle gets set up, and it's very difficult to interfere with when you only look at the pain part. But we can always do something about sleep. Always, always, always. There's little things, and sometimes those little things make a big difference. So just to give you some of the evidence behind that, and it's been around for quite a while, somewhere between 50 and I would say closer to 80% likely of people with chronic pain report sleep problems. It takes them longer to fall asleep. They don't sleep as long. They tend to wake up more often. They don't get into the deeper stages of sleep. And I'm going to show you some slides about stages of sleep in a minute. And we know that sleep deficiency enhances pain sensitivity, even in well adults. When they've done studies with well adults, they've found this. So these are pretty conclusive findings. We know that poor sleep is a stressor, and that's the last thing you need when you have pain is additional stress. So anxiety, depression, maladaptive use of sleep as a coping strategy, all of those things. Yeah, and I've already talked about the risk factors overlapping, so I won't go on about this. There have also been several fairly robust studies now that have demonstrated that when we focus on improving sleep, then people report that they're able to manage their pain better, and they report lower levels of pain. So those are important findings. You know, the two just go together, don't they? So I'm not going to go on about the bidirectionality of it. Other points? Okay, so these are some things I think it's important to keep in mind. A lot of times sleep problems, they don't just emerge out of the blue. We have what's considered to be an epidemic. The World Health Organization calls it an epidemic of sleep deficiency in North America. And that means that it's not something that's just new. It's something that is sort of across the lifespan. And what we're seeing is a lot more children now with sleep problems. And post-COVID, we're going to really have to be thinking about this a lot, right? The amount of screen time that everyone has had to put in, and children who have now become habituated, some of them, to using screens even more than before. So even parents who tried to get their kids not to use them as much, they're going to have a hard time with the weaning process afterwards. And we know that blue spectrum light inhibits sleep. And so the more screen time you use, the more problems you're going to have. There's other reasons for childhood sleep problems. I'm not going to go into it here, but people bring that with them through life. It doesn't just disappear. You know, sometimes it's a phase a child's going through with bad sleep, but more and more it's becoming a chronic habit, chronic problem for them. Sleep deficiency, I said, lowers the pain threshold, and people who report restorative sleep are more likely to have decreased pain. So that's some of the evidence background there. But the thing I think we really need to keep in mind is that whole thing about children and how this is perhaps going to, well, it's something we need to really keep an eye on. Thinking about pain and sleep, I like to think about it as an interconnecting system, because it's not just our biology. It's the society that we're surrounded with, what values we have for sleep. And right now, they're starting to shift, which is really exciting to see, but those campaigns have been around for a long time, and they're really hard work. And I still hear a lot of people say, well, yeah, I'll catch up on the weekend. Or I've trained myself. That's a very common thing to hear. I've trained myself. I only need 5 hours sleep. And I'm going to show you in a bit why that's a problem for people to think that they have trained themselves and that their 5 is enough. So there's what we think about it. There's definitely our biology, all the physiological events. And then how, as a society, we are wired literally electronically wired and for excess light exposure at the worst time possible in the evening and at night. And also that we are a 24/7 society now. A lot of people's job demands are at night, or they are working internationally. And so they are trying to connect with people in Australia. So it's 10 p.m. for them and it's 9 a.m. in Australia, you know, those sorts of things. So anyway, I think of sleep as a system. And so that on one hand, you go, oh, that's sort of overwhelming. There's too many moving pieces. But actually, we should think of that as the plus. Because in an interactive system, sometimes very, very small things can have a huge effect. A good example is thinking about Christopher Reeves. You remember he was the actor who played Superman. And when you think about it, he was one man, so one small input, but the impact that his spinal cord injury had on research and innovations and moving forward in spinal cord rehabilitation was huge. But he was only one man. But how many hundreds of thousands of other people have had spinal cord injuries that had no impact on all of that research, right? So sometimes he was a small input, but because of a variety of other factors in the system had a huge effect. So that's what, in a systems approach, you're looking at. Effect and results are not equal. So sometimes a little tiny nudge will, so never feel that you're not doing enough. A small thing can have a huge impact sometimes, and it may be just enough to get that person a little more back into balance or to feel a little bit more in control so they can do something. And a lot of what I'm going to talk about with sleep, these are things people can control for themselves, right? And that's important. So I use this analogy. If we were doing this in person, if I had a rat, which I guess I couldn't find in Alberta, but if I did happen to have a rat and I said, I'm going to drop this in the room, I could clear the room fairly quickly if people were really worried about that. But if I tried to shove everybody out the door, that would be a lot of effort for me and I wouldn't get very far. But that little rat, that's a pretty small input, but I get a lot of traction from that, right? So never discount the little things. We tend, unfortunately, in healthcare to always jump to the big stuff. And sometimes, you know, that's not the right approach, right? Let's step it up as we need it. So some common sleep disorders, just to talk about this quickly. Sleep apnea. I suspect most of you know this is very underdiagnosed and therefore undertreated, and the effect is significant. Untreated sleep apnea is a risk factor for cardiovascular disease, for stroke, you know, some forms of dementia. A lot of things happen. I don't have time to talk about apnea here, but when somebody tells you they're snoring, it is not a sign of good sleep, right? It's a sign that there's a problem and it should be checked out. And we see sleep apnea in children now. And again, you'll hear often parents saying, oh yeah, he was fast asleep. It was great. He was snoring. I could hear him. And you go, no, that's not a good thing. Parasomnias, we don't see as much of that. But one thing to be aware of as therapists, the relationship that's starting to emerge, and this is only maybe the last 5 years, we're starting to learn more about this, but the relationship in Parkinson's and REM sleep behavior disorder, that's when people have those, you know, they seem to have really violent dreams and they're thrashing out or they're hitting people at night. And they're quite intense. And they found that people who have a history of that actually have an increased risk of Parkinson's. It doesn't mean that one causes the other, but it may be an indication that there needs to be more neurological investigation. So if you know if any of your patients report this to you, you might want to discuss it with their physician about whether there needs to be more investigation, because that kind of very violent flailing around at night is perhaps an indicator it's not just having a bad dream. Hypersomnia, so excessive sleepiness. Again, we don't see as much of that, and it tends to get picked up fairly quickly by physicians. Insomnia, that's the most common thing. And when we're talking about pain, we would be seeing more of this. It's defined as insufficient, disturbed, or non-restorative sleep. And I'll talk more about that. And then there's the circadian disruptions, and those are the alterations in the sleep-wake cycle. So again, people who perhaps have always worked night shifts, do shift work, or people who are, have moved from time zones, all kinds of things can interfere with your just parenting, changes in jobs, all kinds of things can interfere with your circadian rhythms. So very quickly, just to talk about the sleep cycles, there's considered to be 4 stages of sleep. There used to be 5, and then I guess people got tired of that, so they mushed them together. Stages 3 and 4. So now we have stage 1, which is very light. That's the kind of stuff that you'll be sitting, maybe in the afternoon in a meeting or something, and you just, oh, and your head kind of bobs, and then you're awake. It's very light sleep. And all of us do that. We lay down to go to sleep, and we're in a very light stage to begin with, but we're easily woken from that. Then stage 2 is where your breathing starts to slow down, your heart rate slows down, your core temperature drops, and that's important, and I'll explain more about that in a minute. So that happens. Then you move into stage 3, and that is very deep, deep sleep. We start to see delta wave activity changes. You see a lot of things happening at that stage. And then we move into stage 4, which is REM sleep. So rapid eye movement sleep. And then you start to see a lot more theta wave activity, and your brain is active. Now, stage 3 is for a lot of physiological healing. A lot of metabolism happens there. Neurochemical activity occurs there. And then stage 4 is believed to be more about emotional regulation, memory consolidation. So you see, you need to get into all of these stages. If you get stuck in stage 3, that deep sleep, and you never move to stage 4, then it's a problem, right? Physically, you might be okay, but emotionally and cognitively, you will not be doing well, because you never got to that part of your sleep that allowed you to do what you need to there. So we're actually quite active during sleep. A whole cycle of this takes about 90 minutes. And then what happens, I don't know if you can see my cursor here, but so you go through this, and then you come right back up into stage 1 again. So about every 90 minutes, it's very normal to lightly come awake. And so what is the very first thing we think? Oh, I have to go to the bathroom. So off we go, right? And we develop that habit in our heads. But you can reassure people, we all wake up a little bit, and it's okay. That's just part of how it works. It's not a sign that anything is wrong, but we don't just crash down into sleep and stay there. If people are having medicated sleep, the pharmacological, there's still some issues. I mean, they're getting a little bit better, but there's still some issues with a number of the medications getting people into deep sleep, and then they stay there. They don't get a chance to progress into REM sleep. So that's why you'll hear people say, I slept like a log for 12 hours. I was out, but I still feel really groggy and fuzzy and everything. I don't feel good when I wake up. And that's because they never got to move into REM sleep. That's just the type of medications, and they're working on it, but it's not there yet. So that's the other reason why all of the guidelines will say you should always try to consider medication as a short-term intervention, and then you want to move to the non-pharmacologicals as quickly as possible, so you can at least reduce medication or eliminate if possible. And just to go back, well, just one other thing about medication and pain, a lot of the pain meds actually have stimulants in them, right? So sometimes your client or your patient needs to talk to their pharmacist and their physician about the timing, because if they're taking something that has a stimulant in it, but it's before bed, if it's for their pain, but they're taking it before bed, it can get kind of complicated. And it's not my role to talk about medication here, but it can be a big issue for people with pain. So the other thing I want to draw to your attention is we don't spend the same amount of time in each of these stages over the course of the night. When we first go to sleep, it's a lot of fairly, stage 2 kind of stuff, a little bit of deep sleep, and a little short period of REM. But look, we don't it's not until hour 5.5, 6, where we start to get a lot of REM. And so if you are needing to be able to wake up and think and remember and be clear and do your job and all those things, if you've trained yourself to only get 5 hours of sleep a night, you are doing yourself a disservice, right? So that's why we have to help people understand that, yes, physically, because look, you get a fair amount of deep sleep. So physically, you might be hanging in there, but REM sleep, you're not going to get enough until later on in your sleep cycle. We know now that less than 6.5 hours of sleep seems to be a real strong red flag. People who get less than 6.5 hours are at much higher risk of a number of different conditions, a lot of cardiovascular conditions, obesity, diabetes, certain types of dementia, certain types of cancers. I mean, there's a strong relationship that's emerging, and that's the minimum, right? 6.5 hours. So even if you can stop, some people nudge in an extra 15 minutes into their day, or sorry, into their night, that's a good thing, right? So anyway, just to flag that up for you. Oh yes, fancy red. Okay, so a little bit of the neuroscience, right? Homeostasis, right? We need to, it's mediated by our neurotransmitters. So I've already talked about this a bit. We need to get good sleep so that these things are regulated properly. Now, what's happening during the daytime when we're exposed to bright light, bright blue end of the spectrum light, like we get outside and you get from your computer screen, it causes a neurochemical called adenosine to start to build in your system, and it builds and builds and builds, and that keeps us alert. And then when it reaches a certain point, it triggers a response that tells us we're tired. So there's this little tipping point. It's like an off switch. So adenosine is important, and we need that during the day to keep us alert. Then melatonin, obviously, is also very important, but that's for going to sleep, feeling drowsy, feeling like you need to rest. And that occurs in response to dusk. So we have, we're so entrained with light. Everything, a lot of this is all about light. So we need bright light in the daytime and we need dim light at night. Now, these systems, obviously, the way we live and we work are very easy to tamper with. A lot of this is regulated in the hypothalamus. Right? And it's easy to get mixed messages. All we have to do is get too much bright light at night and not enough in the daytime. And that tends to be most people's work environments. I don't know. I'm just thinking, Alex, are you in a room there? Are any of you in rooms that have lights, that have outdoor lighting?
A little bit.
Little bit, right?
A lot of it. See through it. It's frosted, but there's a little light. Yeah.
So a lot of us are in work environments where the lux level, that's how you measure light, right? If you are a photographer, you know about light meters and stuff, and you can get a light meter for your smartphone for 99 cents. You can get a light meter app. And a lot of us are in environments during the day that are about 250, 300 lux. That is way too low. We need to be exposed to at least 10,000 lux for ideally, anywhere from 40 to 60 minutes a day at a minimum, just to get enough to keep our bodies properly regulated. So it becomes challenging. And then at night, we sit and we stare at the screens and we're not getting enough dim exposure. And by that, I mean lux that's lower than 30, right? So at night, you want less than 30, and in the daytime, you want about 1,000. So it's challenging. And I'm not going to go into all this. You remember the anatomy of the eye. If you don't worry about it, because I wouldn't want to do that test right now either. Okay, so it's easy for our sleep to get out of whack, right? And what happens then, our stress response can get overactivated. And now this is starting to sound like talking about pain pathways, right? That anyway, won't go into all that. So jet lag, sound. Okay, these are other things to talk. There's sleep is regulated very much by light, but also by sound and temperature. And then of course, medication, injury, and diet that can throw things up. But I'm going to talk about light, sound, temperature, and bedding actually at this point. So this is repetitive to a certain amount, the hormones and other chemicals we need to be healthy, adenosine, serotonin, melatonin, they're controlled by the hypothalamus. Pain and sleep are both strongly influenced. I already said before about HTPA, and that whole system works together, right? So it makes sense why we're seeing this so closely linked. And we can really put this whole thing out of whack without very much effort. So what's the bottom line? We can't always do much about pain, or we feel sometimes quite frustrated about how little we can do, or that it's taking so long, but we can always do something about sleep. So I don't mean to go too fast here, but I feel like it's always hard to judge how much physiology anybody wants to hear, and that's a whole lecture in itself. So I want to move into the factors, and then we'll get on to the interventions. So if you just bear with me here, I want to leave enough time for some questions at the end. So light, we're aiming for at least 1,000, preferably, you know, even higher if you can get it, and under 30 lux at night. And again, how you would measure how much lux exposure you're getting is you download the app, you hold the monitor up by your eye, and that's where you would take the reading, not sort of like waving it around in the room, right? You want to know what's coming in at the eye. Sound, again, as I'm selling apps to you here, you can get decibel measuring apps on your smartphone, 99 cents. Some of them are free, doesn't matter. And again, you want to check what's the ambient sound in a sleep environment. And most patients and clients are happy to do this stuff. They're actually quite amazed when they find out how much ambient sound that they have just sort of accommodated to in the background. Anything over 30 decibels will alert you. It doesn't mean you wake fully up, but it will start your body producing some of those alerting neurochemicals, right? And getting more, oh, okay, maybe there is a threat. Maybe I should be paying more attention. So it will take you out of those deep sleep stages and bring you into more alert stage. And it doesn't, you know, then it's like going back to the beginning and starting over again. So we want to make sure to keep things as quiet as possible, or use environmental modifications to decrease the amount of sound. Then temperature. Temperature also regulates our circadian rhythms. 18 to 20 Celsius is a good ballpark to aim for. A lot of people can't achieve that. They don't have that kind of control. But one of the most important things is our core temperature needs to be able to drop, because that, again, triggers a whole neurochemical response that tells your body to go to sleep. And there are ways I'm going to show you in a minute. You can kind of trick your body into having a slight drop in core temperature to start that process. And then I'm going to talk to you about bedding and allergens. So this is just some of the evidence about exposure to blue spectrum light, and how using a laptop before or other, you know, electronic device will suppress melatonin production, and for quite a significant amount of time after you remove the exposure. So in this study, even an hour after they'd remove the exposure, so they turned the laptop off, these participants still had 22% melatonin suppression, right? And then when they added an extra light source, like using LEDs at the same time as a tablet, 70% melatonin suppression, even an hour later, right? So you can see why people aren't falling asleep very easily. One of the things to keep in mind, and again, your clients might be interested in this, or you, if you're buying some new devices, you can check out the specs, because there are different amounts of lux that are emitted. There's different amounts of illumination in many different products. And so if I was buying something new, I would not be going for a MacBook Pro, quite honestly, because look at the amount of lux exposure, 77, compared to, oh, let's get, you know, like I don't know, I'll go for a Dell, all right, 26. It's just, you want to just be thinking about that. And there are ways, you know, there's some software that's built into your devices now that will dim the screens, and it helps, but it's not, you know, like, I mean, why not just start with something that doesn't emit as much to begin with? And the good old advice that everybody's always given is, well, just turn your devices off, at least an hour before bed, turn all the electronics off. And I go, that is just not the real world anymore. And we have to stop saying things like that to people. We should explain why exposure to light is a problem for them, and then help them problem solve around that, but also bring them some of the technology that will help with that problem solving, because it is not the real world anymore to say, turn everything off. And all we do is set our patients up to feel bad or to lie to us or to go, oh, well, whatever, and think this is just a waste of time. So things like, you know, these kinds of, there, I put on my fashion statement for the morning. These are blue spectrum filtering goggles. Now, they are not the same thing as those glasses you can get now for computer eye strain. Those are helpful, but these things are heavy duty to filter out all of the blue spectrum that's coming out of my computer right now. And so it changes what I see in terms of the colors, but the acuity is just fine. And so I pop these things on about 90 minutes before I'm thinking I'm going to go to bed if I'm using devices. And it helps, you know, that's all I can say. I caution people to be careful where they purchase these sorts of things. I put a couple of reliable resources in the PowerPoint in a minute. This company is from, actually the University of Toronto is affiliated with this company. They use it to finance some of their research. And because there's a lot of junk you can buy online these days, right? So you just want to help people make sure they're not just buying colored plastic. These actually have, you know, certain properties that are built in, and there's other sources, and I'll show you those in a bit. But let's help people, you know, use the technologies out there. You can also get filters, like a physical filter that will go over your screen if you don't want to wear goggles. There are different things we can use. Okay, so you can decrease that nighttime. I hear a lot of people tell me that, well, I have to have the TV on. That's the only way I can fall asleep. Well, okay, I'm not going to argue with them about it. Why would I do that? That just interferes with our relationship. But what I might suggest is, can you put it on a timer, right? Are there ways that we can make sure that you're as exposed for as less amount of time as possible? For laptops and computers, you can get this filtering software that is actually quite effective, Flux. It's been around for a long time and it's free. You install it and then it will automatically, you set it for the time zone that you're in, and then it automatically comes on at the right time, and it turns your screen sort of an orangey looking color. And again, it's, you know, it's a workaround. It's not ideal, but it's better than just direct exposure. And then of course there's the apps for smartphones and stuff like Twilight. Sometimes just checking the lux level in the bedroom really helps people a lot. And people's kids like to do this. So if you have clients who need, you know, some sleep police, kids are great for that. These goggles here are the two sources that I would recommend to people. Blue block glasses. They're out of the States, and low blue lights, they're the one blue block, they're the one in Toronto. And then the low blue lights, I think they're in Michigan, but again, they're affiliated with the university and it's part of a research lab. So I know that they're good. It's American dollars, right? I'm sure there are other sources. I'm not trying to sell anything, but people need to beware when they're buying these. The ones you get for $5.99 on Amazon are not going to help you. And then you're going to say, well, that was garbage, and discard it, right? So let's help people find the right stuff. So there's decreasing your light at night, but also in the daytime, how are you going to get enough? And a number of us, like I said, we don't work in environments where we get light. So sometimes went too far. We need light boxes, you know, the same things that you would use for seasonal affective disorder. They're very effective for blue light exposure to help with adenosine in the daytime. So if I was using a light box, you recommend to people 2 times a day for 20 minutes. So what works out for a lot of people, like, okay, at breakfast time and at lunchtime. And then after that, you wouldn't use it, right? Because you don't want to be building up adenosine any longer, you know, after lunch, you're starting to move into that phase where you need to have dim light then. This one, it sounds ridiculous, but we do have to remind people sometimes that watch their sunglasses use. They're not fashion statements. And some people need to wear sunglasses, you know, I mean, we wear them to protect our eyes, and some people have medical conditions and take medication that make them photosensitive. But if you don't need to be wearing them, don't put them on, because then you are blocking your exposure to blue spectrum light that you need in the daytime to regulate your circadian rhythm. So just reminding people to, you know, be mindful of when they use them instead of just like slap them on all the time. And I see people, I've seen little kids in the grocery store with sunglasses on, and anyway, won't go down that road. All right, so just be strategic. And also, you know, where you sit or how you position your work area or what you're doing, because light is good, right? Light is good for us in the daytime. Okay, here's what I was telling you before about temperature. And this is kind of a little that whole thing about core body temperature, that really makes a difference for people who are quite athletic and do strenuous types of activities later in the day. It causes problems for their sleep because their core temperature gets elevated during that activity, and then it won't drop. You know, it takes time for it to drop sufficiently for them to be able to go to sleep. And so I absolutely big supporter of vigorous activity, but sometimes you need to talk to people about their timing of that. 10 o'clock at night is not a good time to go out and do really vigorous stuff. But again, sometimes we have no choice, right? This comes back into the whole social problem. When can you get ice time? When can you get, you know, certain sports facilities available to you? And sometimes that is late at night. So we have to help people devise ways to maybe artificially drop their core temperature a little bit. And how you can do that, things like holding a hot water bottle in your lap for 15 minutes and then taking the hot water bottle away. And your body will register that, oh, that heat is gone, and it'll drop a little bit. Or taking a bath or a hot shower. And then when you get out of the shower, your core temperature will drop a little bit. And again, our bodies go, oh, okay, I go to sleep. And we've always, you know, people say, oh yeah, taking a bath before bed is good because it relaxes you. And maybe for some people it does, but actually what it's doing is causing that physiological change. So temperature's gone up, and then you take away the heat source and it drops. So just to be mindful about temperature too. It does make a difference. And we've all experienced those hot, sleepless nights, right? So, you know, excuse me. Okay, sound. So I mentioned this before. When sound gets above 30 decibels, which is about very quiet speaking of what I'm doing now, you might not even be able to hear me. That's like a little bit more than 30 actually. So 30 decibels, it doesn't take much to get there. But when we're asleep, if we hear that, our bodies are wired for fight or flight, right? That's how we were developed. So when we hear things, even faintly, our bodies start to alert and do an assessment. Oh, should I be awake now? Is something coming? Is there a threat that's involved? So anything we can do to reduce noise is very good for us. We have a lot of noise pollution. And there's always a conflict between keeping the window open so it's cool enough, and then, you know, you've got all the ambient sound. So one thing that helps is background filtering, so that it might be above 30, but it's constant above 30. So things like a fan or an air conditioner or a white noise app, those things, they'll usually run at about 50, 60, sometimes a little bit higher decibels, but because they are constant, you actually can sleep better with something like that on than if you tried to just go it alone in the, you know, with normal ambient sound, where you'd hear every sudden sharp noise, like, oh, a door opened or a car went past, and those things alert us because our bodies go, what's going on? There are silicone earplugs, not those foam things, but there are silicone ones you can get, and they're fairly inexpensive. Swimmers use them a lot, right? And you just warm them up in your hand and mold them in. You can get them at any drugstore. Those help a lot too. They block out a lot more sound than the foam things ever would. If somebody's going to experiment with a white noise app, I never knew this before, but it's interesting. Sound comes in different frequencies, so have them experiment. Maybe they need brown noise or pink noise, not the white noise, right? Because we all vibrate to different frequencies. Sorry, I should have clicked this on first. Here's just an example of the types of sounds, the decibel levels, right? So you can see, you know, some people are exposed to heavy noise over the course of the night. So if somebody does a decibel reading in their bedroom and they tell you, oh my goodness, you know, it was 180 degree or 180 decibels most of the night, you think, well, that's sort of like standing there watching the airplanes take off. Okay, and here's the last freaky thing I'm going to tell you about is dust mites. People who wake up and they say, you know, my mouth was all dry and I wasn't breathing. And yes, it could be sleep apnea, but also they could be having an allergic reaction to dust mite feces. It's not the mites, they don't bite us, and they are here. Everybody has dust mites in their environment. There's nothing you can do about it, but it does have to do with the type of bedding that we use. Dust mites like polyesters, they can cling to them more easily. They don't like tightly woven natural fibers. So sometimes, you know, just talking to clients about the type of bedding they use and how frequently they change the bedding. Some people have very elaborate, fancy, froofy duvets and pillows and all this other kind of stuff that's very difficult to wash. And you don't have to wash everything. Some of those, like pillows is a good example, right? Or duvets. You don't have to wash them every week, but stuff them in the dryer. And usually 30 minutes on, you know, a medium high cycle of a dry item is sufficient to get rid of a lot of the dust mite feces and to reduce the amount, the count of dust mites. Okay? Or for some people, they need to use those mattress barriers or pillow barriers, just to take a look at that, and really recommending to people, take a look at how old their pillow is. Because all of this, you know, that's the thing closest to your face, right? And you're breathing that in, and it can have quite a significant effect on people's sleep. So, okay, so there's some very pragmatic things. I'm going to talk really quick just about caffeine, and because caffeine and pain and sleep. Caffeine, we know, decreases actually the effect of some analgesics. Okay, so there's some research that's starting to suggest that. And also, if you know, caffeine itself can for some people actually enhance their pain sensitivity, or can cause pain itself. People who are used to drinking excessive amounts of caffeine, and then when they try to stop, it can cause headaches and certain withdrawal. So there's a lot. You need to do a whole day workshop on caffeine. And one thing, Health Canada did a study a few years ago, and they just looked at where were we getting caffeine exposure. In Canada, you do not have to disclose the amount of caffeine that is in a product. So you know those nutritional labels on the back of food and stuff? They don't have to disclose how much caffeine is in anything. In some countries you do, but not here. And so manufacturers, and there's no law against them supplementing products with caffeine. And so some manufacturers do, because people like things when it makes them feel kind of good and perky, and that's the side effect of the caffeine, right? But they don't even know they're having it. And so, for example, what Health Canada found, Starbucks, this is their graph. They supplement their coffee quite significantly with caffeine compared to some of the other manufacturers. And I'm not picking on them. There are other people who supplement. But Red Bull, you look at, here's Red Bull down here. Well, you might as well drink 2 Red Bull if you're looking at caffeine, and you get less than 1 Starbucks, right? It's kind of interesting. The recommended amount for adults, 400 milligrams max per day. But because it's hidden in a lot of places, it's hard for us to figure out where that is. Okay? So we have to be educated consumers, and you can just Google caffeine content and the product, and it'll take you to different websites where people are trying to do this work, but usually you don't get it from the manufacturer. And we know that caffeine can have all kinds of toxic effects over long term. So here's a perfect Canadian example. This chocolate bar was on the Dragon's Den a few years ago, and everyone got, oh, that's so exciting, and it keeps you awake. And it's because they have added 101 milligrams of caffeine to this chocolate bar. And they, you know, there's no rules that say you can't buy it, and children buy it. Anyone can buy the thing. But for children under 12, the maximum amount of caffeine that they should, you know, recommended maximum is 40 milligrams. So if a child has one of these, they are wired. And anyway, and some people don't understand why this is a problem, but think back about all these effects, right? And at different parts of your life, these effects are obviously of different significance. But even for young adults, excessive caffeine use can interfere with fertility. As you get older, bone density, calcium uptake, those things become important, right? So you have to find the right pitch for where, but excess caffeine interferes with learning. So we don't want children having the awake chocolate bar. So anyway, that's my rant for the day on caffeine, and I'll stop ranting about it now. I think I've done my job. All right, so what do we do? All right, understand the why, help people understand why. And I've given you some, I know in the invite that went out, there were some links. That Sleep On It Canada website is great. It was designed to help the public understand about this stuff. Because once people understand, they're smart, they'll figure it out. We ask people little things at a time. You know, if somebody's not going to give up that chocolate bar, well, okay, but can we look at something else that is manageable? Maybe there's something that they really, oh, that's interesting, right? So let's take a little bit of time, right? Eat that elephant one bite at a time. Increase light in the daytime, decrease light at night, pretty straightforward. Use the technology that's out there. And people are quite creative. They'll go, they'll Google, they'll bring you something, they'll ask your opinion. You can help them determine, is this evidence-based or not? You know, like, is there some support for it? Or are they being sold a gimmick? Because this is big money right now, right? Sleep, I'm sorry, that I'm speechless about the garbage that's out there, and people are spending a lot of money, and some people are making a fortune. It's not a regulated industry. And so I think our jobs as rehab professionals is to help people find the right stuff and not get ripped off, quite honestly, because there's terrible stuff out there. Okay, block out noise if you can and cool down. And here's some additional resources you could listen to. And some of you have likely heard Dr. Kular's presentation about sleep and chronic pain. I would recommend you go back to that, and he makes more of the very specific links. This is a nice little, well, I shouldn't say it's nice. I did this for the phys ed kinesiology department, actually, a couple of years ago at the university, and it's more related to athletes and sleep challenges for them. So you're welcome to look at that on YouTube, Sleep On It Canada. And this, just to put in a plug here at the very end, God, yeah, I've taken up all the time. Better Days, Better Nights is a group that is developing an e-learning program for parents of children under 12. And so you get free access if you join up for their study. And so for some people, you might want to check this out because it's a really cool program. And it's great that they're piloting it now, right? So it's free. So anyway, I'm so sorry. Oops, thanks. I'm going to stop sharing there. Oh, no. We don't want that.
Thank you for that amazing presentation, because I got so many ideas now.
I have to get rid of this now. Oh, there. Okay. I am back to the Zoom call. Oh, sorry. Oh, thank you. I'm so sorry I went way over time like that.
It was fantastic information, like fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. I think we have a couple of questions in the chat. I think one was about the goggles. Do they come in child size?
Yes. Now the group up in Toronto, not so much. I don't think they have different styles, but you know, kids' heads, some of them are fairly large, but the low blue lights people out of Minneapolis, I think, they have, and they also have night lights, and they have small, medium, and large goggles, but they also have night lights and different products, and they have the filters you can put right on the device, and it sticks on and it stays there. So yeah, it's worth looking at their website. Yeah,
perfect.
And they're low blue lights. I don't know if you can. There we go. Yeah, just a little more expensive. So yeah,
sleep is worth it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I think another one that I saw jumped out was, what happens if somebody's allergic to dust mites? You're talking about the bedding.
Mm-hmm. So, well, what happens is it's like dust mite feces is an allergen, and so you won't be able to breathe properly. And so if you're not breathing properly, you're not oxygenating, and you won't sleep well. So it's kind of like having sleep apnea in a way. But anyone who's got allergies knows what it's like trying to sleep when you gasping for air and you're just not getting, you won't get as good a rest. Yeah.
Thank you. I think we got another one that was from Stuart. How important is it to focus on regular wake times and adenosine buildup for sleep drive? Like, is that regular sleep hygiene of going to bed at the same time, getting up at the same time?
Yeah, really important. I mean, there's so many things. The most important thing is getting up at the same time. That's what keeps us regulated, even on the weekends. Going to bed, you know, we all need some flexibility sometimes, but if you continue to always get up at the right time, you're going to be tired to go to sleep. But yeah, that's an important thing, because you don't want that creep to occur where you've stayed up later, so you sleep in longer, then you stay up even later, and then yeah, suddenly you're awake all night and asleep all day. Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
Thank you, Kevin, for your comment. Poop hits the fan. Okay, sorry.
I think we had another one about, lost it. Oh, is there a test to different allergy versus apnea, like as opposed to like stop bang for allergy for apnea? So, is there a way to tell the difference between allergy and apnea?
Well, so again, that's where I would talk to a physician, but to begin with, you know, if you know, there's diagnosed allergies, and then there are things that are allergens that will just make all of us a little bit more stuffy or make our eyes run, or, you know, and if you have a lot of dust mite buildup, it's a fairly simple thing to manage. I mean, dust mites are in everyone's environment. They live off of our skin. That's what they do, right? When you shed skin, they eat it up. So they're everywhere. But what you want to do is reduce the amount of exposure at the face level. And so things like just throwing your pillows in the dryer, washing the sheets more often, changing the pillowcase maybe twice a week instead of once a week or whatever, that all helps. But, you know, if you have allergies, these are things we go to the physician to get diagnosed, right?
Yeah. Treat the allergy for sure.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you. I didn't know about putting stuff in the dryer. That was new one to me. So my dryer will be going quite a bit in the next little while. Arlene asked a question. UV light can damage the eyes. Ophthalmologists strongly recommend UV blocking sunglasses, even at early ages. How do we honor both messages of needing bright light so that we set our rhythms, but yet not exposing to UV?
Yeah.
How do we balance? I guess it's balance.
Yeah, it's challenging, isn't it? Because, and some people have medications that make, you know, them photosensitive. There are a lot of things to it. So that's why this blanket advice is not helpful. We have to contextualize for, you know, like ask patients these questions, but nobody's suggesting staring into the light unless you're a politician who is no longer around, which is nice. But being out in the daylight, right? And maybe it means that you're sitting with your back to the sun. But yeah, if somebody's been told you have to have things on, but you know, there's what well, I'm not going to go down that road.
Do some reading. Moderation. Don't stare into the sun, but you do need some light. You can't just be in your sunglasses 24/7 in the house.
Yeah, there are people, well, I'm a good case in point. I mean, my eyes have not fallen out of my head, and I haven't used sunglasses for years, except in very specific circumstances. And, you know, so I feel that I am protecting myself, but I'm not, you know, I'm not denying myself the benefits, because UV light also is of a benefit to us at times. So
I find balance. And I think we had one,
balance.
In terms of managing patient expectations, what is a reasonable time frame to see improvements in sleep if adherent to some of these things? That's a good question there.
One of the things, you know, like with the environmental modifications, you have to give it a try. You know, I always encourage people, because they're small asks, right? Like wearing earplugs, well, okay, they might not work in a couple of days, but give it a try for a couple of weeks. And if it doesn't work, okay, let's look at something else. I always try to keep these conversations pretty low demand, right? So that nobody feels bad if it didn't work or if they don't like the idea, because that just interferes with your relationship with someone. And when people have pain, they've got so many things they're juggling. They don't need a big ask. And so that's why, you know, the sleep hygiene advice about, if you can't sleep, get out of bed and go and sit in the living room until you're tired again. Really? yeah, you know, like for me, I wouldn't do that. But if some healthcare provider told me, I'd say, well, thank you. Yeah, so we just have to keep it small stuff, and no big deal. If it doesn't work, try something different. As long, if people understand what they're trying to achieve, which is basically more light in the daytime or less light at night, they'll come up with their own strategies. People are smart.
So educational, let them choose. There's a couple of two last ones. Is wearing a hat counterproductive to being out in the daylight? And there's a question about blue light blockers there. So
no, I think again, it's just, you know, it's the context that you're in, right? If you need a hat to protect yourself, then yeah, wear a hat. There's a lot of actually that makes me think of something else. So there's a lot of reflected light from surfaces, right? And so that's why, you know, like hats don't protect us completely from everything. You can have a hat on and still get a sunburn if you're out on the water, right? So yeah, you're still getting light exposure even if you're wearing a hat. And then the light blue blockers helpful when you're very harsh LED overhead lights. Well, there are those, I would say it can't hurt to try, you know, and I know some people find those ones that you can buy now for daytime use that look clear but have those filters built into them for computer use are fine. What I like about these kinds of goggles, like these, they wrap around, they cover up everything, right? So I'm not getting things trickling in. Yeah.
And they're also quality, like you said before, make sure you get them from a reputable place, because the $5.99 on Amazon might not be doing what we think they're doing.
Yeah,
it's
I
not
think
regulated.
Yeah, exactly. And it's unfortunate. I'm hoping more regulation will come in. But, you know, the fact that we don't have mandatory reporting of caffeine supplements in Canada is concerning.
Yeah.
Right. We should think about that. And also melatonin. There's no, although melatonin is regulated, it's considered to be like a supplement, like a vitamin. And we have to stop and think melatonin is a hormone. And so we shouldn't be taking it without being informed, right? Because there isn't enough research yet about what dosage, what time, all those other sorts of things. Is there long-term effect? A lot of countries do not sell melatonin over the counter. It's by prescription only. So, and they think we are crazy. When I go to these sleep conferences and they go, you do what? You can do how? So yeah, we just need to be mindful. And if our bodies can produce our own melatonin, why wouldn't we, right? So we need to go back. There's a long discussion here from Arlene. So that's okay.
Oh yeah, I just wanted to add, because I had a quick boo, and you can wear a hat and you can wear sunglasses, and they've done the studies and you still get lots of lux. So we're good both ways.
Great. Thank you for that. Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, it's a conversation to keep going, right? And including our patients in the whole thing, because they're smart, resourceful people. And I just find my message is always, I try not to confront people about maladaptive beliefs too much. I try to provide the education that they need, and then maybe work on a different area. And then maybe we can come back to it later and they'll be more receptive. You know, because some ideas are very firmly entrenched. There's something that they are entrenched. There's something they learned as a child and that their whole family believes. And so, you know, let's go down a different route. Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming and speaking to us. It's been amazing. We have a huge group today. So I don't know if Stu would like to jump in and say anything, but I heard so many useful things that's personally useful as well as for my patients. And also that sort of thread that you wove throughout it, that therapeutic alliance is key. You know, be gentle with your patients and you can always come back to it, and that little things can make a difference. So it was super useful. Stu?
That's the same. Thanks a lot for your presentation. Really appreciated.
Oh, thank you for your time. So when the recording's finished, I'll shoot it off to you, and yeah,
that'd be marvelous.
Whatever. Maybe I'll stick it on YouTube, and then
oh, wonderful.
That's likely easiest to get it that way. Big files do not like to travel in the internet. Anyway, thank you all very much for your time.
Thank you. And I hope your weather improves up there.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye.
Okay, bye-bye.